Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Sam Rivers, and I should have forgotten the case of Ashley Turner. But something brought me back to that damned forest in October 2003. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the 19-year-old college student vanished without a trace from the Blackwood National Forest. 6 months since I'd failed my first major case as a rookie ranger. 6 months since her parents' desperate phone call stopped coming. Their hope finally crushed under the weight of bureaucratic phrases like insufficient evidence and presumed deceased. I was reorganizing case files in the cramped ranger station office when I found it. A manila envelope that shouldn't have existed, wedged behind my metal filing cabinet. My name was scrawled across it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, a single Polaroid photograph made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped it. Ashley Turner, alive. Bound to what looked like a wooden post, her mouth open in a silent scream. But it was the background that made my stomach revolt. Robed figures arranged in a circle, their faces hidden by crude masks carved from bark. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written in red ink, "She waits for harvest moon. October 31st, the old church ruins. Come alone or she dies screaming." My breathing became shallow and rapid, like I couldn't pull enough oxygen from the stale office air. The muscles in my neck tightened like steel cables as I stared at proof that Ashley Turner was still alive, and in the hands of something that defied every rational explanation I'd clung to during my 3 months as a forest ranger. The flip phone on my belt vibrated. Text message from an unknown number. "You failed her once, rookie. Don't fail her again. Follow the blood trail north of Miller's Creek, they're waiting." I grabbed my gear with trembling fingers, analog radio crackling with static, basic GPS unit that would be useless under the forest canopy, heavy maglite flashlight, and my grandfather's .38 revolver that I'd never fired outside the practice range. My hands were so unsteady I had to attempt the holster clasp 3 times. The October air bit through my ranger jacket as I drove the dirt service road toward Miller's Creek. My mind raced between denial and acceptance, rational thought fragmenting like static on my radio. Cults in Blackwood Forest? It was impossible. I knew every inch of this wilderness, every trail, every campsite. How could an entire group operate without? The thoughts died as I reached the creek and saw it. A trail of what looked like dried blood, dark brown stains leading north into the dense pine forest where no official trails existed. But this wasn't animal blood. It was too deliberate, too organized. Someone had created a path using human blood as markers on tree trunks, spacing them exactly 20 feet apart. I followed the trail deeper into territory I'd never explored, my boots crunching through fallen leaves that seemed too quiet, too undisturbed. The silence was wrong. No bird calls, no insect noise, no small animals rustling through underbrush. Even the wind had stopped, leaving only the sound of my increasingly labored breathing. 3 miles in, I found the first body, or what remained of one. A hiker's torso hung from a massive oak tree, suspended by rusted chains that had grown into the bark over time. The rib cage had been split open and hollowed out, the cavity filled with stones arranged in some kind of pattern. Maggots writhed through empty eye sockets, and the smell of decay mixed with something else, something sweet and chemical that made my stomach lurch. Bile rose in my throat with a sharp metallic taste. My vision tunneled until I could only focus on a small area directly in front of me. Sweat erupted across my forehead despite the October chill, and my hands became so slippery with perspiration, I had to wipe them on my pants. The blood trail continued north. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Sam's situation? Comment below. I found 3 more bodies over the next hour, all displayed in the same ritualistic manner, all in various stages of decomposition that suggested months or even years of killings. But it was the 5th discovery that made me understand the true scope of what I was facing. A clearing opened before me, revealing the ruins of what had once been a church. Stone walls still stood 15 feet high, covered in twisted vines and moss, but the roof had collapsed decades ago. Wooden crosses hung inverted from dead tree branches surrounding the perimeter, and the ground was scorched in perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And there, in the center of it all, was Ashley Turner. She hung suspended between two wooden posts, her arms stretched wide in a mockery of crucifixion. But she was alive. I could see her chest rising and falling with desperate, shallow breaths. Her college sweatshirt was stained with blood and other substances I didn't want to identify, and her left arm bent at an angle that made my own bones ache in sympathy. "Ashley," I called out, stepping into the clearing. That's when they emerged from the forest. 12 figures in brown robes stepped out from behind trees and ruins with the synchronized movement of a predator pack. Their masks weren't bark after all. They were carved from human skulls with symbols burned into the bone that seemed to move and shift when I looked directly at them. The leader spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Welcome, Ranger Rivers. We've been expecting you." My hand moved to my weapon, but my muscles felt disconnected from my brain, responding seconds too late. One of the robed figures raised what looked like a human femur bone, and suddenly my entire body seized up like I'd grabbed a live electrical wire. "The rookie ranger," another voice chuckled from beneath a skull mask. "So eager to prove himself, so willing to walk into our trap." I tried to speak, to move, to do anything, but my vocal cords felt paralyzed. They approached slowly, savoring my helplessness. "Ashley Turner was never missing," the leader continued, circling me like a shark. "She was chosen, selected for her bloodline, her heritage. Did you know her great-grandmother was one of the last witches burned in these woods? The same bloodline that destroyed our order in 1952? The paralysis began to fade, feeling returning to my extremities in painful tingles. I managed to gasp out, What do you want?" "Revenge," the leader said simply, "and resurrection. Tonight is Harvest Moon, Ranger Rivers. Tonight we complete the ritual that will bring back our master, the one your government thought they killed 50 years ago." One of the cultists approached Ashley with a curved blade that gleamed with fresh blood. She turned her head toward me, her eyes wide with terror but also something else, hope. She still believed I could save her. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "When everything goes to hell, boy, you don't think, you act." The .38 cleared my holster faster than I'd ever moved in my life. The first shot took down the cultist with the blade, the bullet entering his chest with a wet smack that sprayed blood across Ashley's legs. The second shot shattered the skull mask of another figure, revealing a face so decayed and wrong that my mind refused to process what I was seeing. But there were too many of them. A bone club cracked against my skull, sending stars exploding across my vision. I dropped to my knees as warm blood ran down my forehead. Hands grabbed my arms, my legs, dragging me toward the center of the clearing where Ashley hung. "You'll watch her die," the leader hissed, his breath smelling like grave dirt and rotting meat. "You'll watch us carve her open and pull out her beating heart, and then you'll beg us to let you join her." The curved blade approached Ashley's throat. She looked at me one final time, her lips moving silently. "Thank you for coming back." Something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped into place like a bone setting properly after being dislocated. Every instinct my training had tried to teach me, every piece of wilderness survival knowledge, every drop of determination to prove myself worthy of the Ranger badge, it all crystallized into pure, focused rage. I headbutted the cultist holding my left arm, his nose exploding in a spray of blood and cartilage. My elbow drove into another's throat, crushing his windpipe with a sound like stepping on dry leaves. The knife I kept in my boot found the kidney of a third attacker, and his scream echoed through the ruins. But the leader had reached Ashley. The blade touched her throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "Stop, or she dies now." I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal. But Ashley's eyes met mine, and I saw her mouth one word. "Now." She swung her body weight to the side, pulling the rope taut and yanking the leader off balance. The blade went wide, slicing air instead of flesh, I put 3 bullets center mass into the leader's chest. He dropped like a sack of meat, black blood pooling beneath his body. The remaining cultists hesitated for just a moment, long enough for me to reach Ashley and cut her bonds with my knife. She collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with exhaustion and terror. "They kept me alive," she whispered. "Fed me just enough, said they needed my blood fresh for the ritual." "Can you walk?" I asked, checking her injuries. "Multiple cuts, severe dehydration, possible broken arm, but alive." "I think so." We made it 50 yards before they started following us, not running, hunting. I could hear them moving through the forest with inhuman coordination, communicating through sounds that hurt my ears. My radio crackled with interference, the GPS unit showed impossible coordinates, and my flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. Ashley stumbled, her broken arm causing her to lose balance. "I can't. I need to rest. We can't stop." I helped her to her feet, my own exhaustion making everything feel dreamlike and distant. "They're still out there." That's when I heard it, chanting in a language that predated any human tongue I knew. The words seemed to claw at my consciousness, trying to burrow into my brain and make me understand things I didn't want to know. The forest itself began to change around us. Trees twisted into impossible geometries, their branches reaching toward us like gnarled fingers. The ground beneath our feet turned soft and yielding, like walking on flesh instead of earth. "Sam." Ashley grabbed my arm with her good hand. "Look." Ahead of us, the forest path had become something else entirely. The trees formed a corridor of living wood that pulsed with its own heartbeat. At the far end I could see light, but it wasn't the warm light of civilization. It was cold, blue, and wrong. "They're hurting us," I realized, "driving us towards something." Behind us, the chanting grew louder. They were close now, close enough that I could smell the grave dirt on their breath and hear the wet sound of their footsteps in the corrupted earth. I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Ashley, I need you to run. Straight ahead, don't look back, don't stop until you reach the road." "What about you?" "I'm going to buy you time." I turned to face the approaching cultists, my remaining 3 bullets feeling inadequate against whatever they'd become. But Ashley grabbed my jacket with desperate strength. "No, we go together or not at all." The chanting stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard something worse than any human voice. The sound of the earth itself beginning to crack and split behind us. Something was rising from beneath the forest floor, something that had been waiting 50 years for this moment. "Run," I whispered. We ran. The corridor of twisted trees seemed to stretch infinitely ahead of us, but we ran anyway. Behind us, the ground erupted with a sound like thunder, and something roared with a voice that made the trees themselves shudder. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Some knowledge was too dangerous for human minds to process. We reached the end of the corridor just as my radio crackled to life with a familiar voice. "Unit 7, this is base. What's your location?" Never had static and interference sounded so beautiful. The blue light faded, the trees returned to normal, and we found ourselves on the service road next to my truck. Ashley collapsed against the hood, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked back toward the forest. In the distance, I could see smoke rising from the direction of the ruins. Whatever they'd been trying to summon had consumed them instead. "Yeah," I said, helping her into the truck. "It's over." But I was wrong. 3 days later, as I filled out the final paperwork on Ashley's rescue, I found another envelope on my desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 1952. "Cult leader dies in police raid." The photo showed a man in robes being led away in handcuffs. His face was partially obscured, but I could see enough to recognize him. It was the same man I'd shot 3 times in the chest. The same man who had bled black blood and smiled as he died. At the bottom of the clipping, someone had written in red ink, "Some things can't stay buried forever, Ranger Rivers. We'll be waiting." Ashley Turner recovered fully from her ordeal. She transferred to a college in California and never spoke publicly about what happened in Blackwood Forest. But sometimes, late at night, she calls me with reports of strange dreams, visions of robed figures and twisted trees. And sometimes, when I'm patrolling the deep woods alone, I find fresh blood trails leading north from Miller's Creek. I follow them anyway, because I'm Sam Rivers, and I don't leave people behind, even when I should. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Ashley Turner and the resurgent cult. I read every single one. My name is Alex Garrison, and this was the 6th hour searching for Jordan Matthews on the trails of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My breath came out in visible puffs in the cold October air, and the sweat under my ranger uniform had dried and formed again twice over. My leather Danner boots were caked with mud and dead leaves, and I could feel a blister forming on my left heel. The Motorola radio clipped to my belt crackled with static. Unit 23, what's your current 20? Over. I checked the Garmin GPS on my wrist. Base, I'm at coordinates 35.6532 degree N, 83.5070 degree W, Alum Cave Trail. Still no sign of Jordan Matthews. Over. Copy that, Garrison. Search chopper reports heavy fog rolling in. Visibility's gonna drop to less than 50 meters within the hour. Over. Shit. I pressed the radio button harder than necessary. Roger that, base. Continuing search pattern. Out. Jordan Matthews, 22 years old, archaeology student from University of Tennessee, disappeared yesterday afternoon during a solo hike to document supposed unofficial historical sites for his senior thesis. His girlfriend, Sarah Chen, had called 911 at 11:30 p.m. when Jordan failed to return to their campsite. 12 hours later, I was still grid-searching these godforsaken mountains with nothing but boot prints that led nowhere, and a growing knot of frustration in my gut. 23 years of ranger service, and I'd seen it all. Lost hikers who wandered off trail chasing a perfect Instagram shot. Experienced climbers who got cocky and took risks that would make a rookie cringe. Urban kids who thought a weekend in the wilderness meant bringing nothing but energy bars and a smartphone. Most of them turned up within 6 hours. Cold, scared, maybe a little dehydrated, but alive. Jordan Matthews wasn't most of them. The kid had done everything right. Proper gear, detailed trail plan filed with the ranger station, GPS coordinates shared with his girlfriend every 2 hours until 3:47 p.m. yesterday. Then, nothing. Radio silence, like he'd just evaporated into the mountain air. My jaw muscles tightened as I stepped over a fallen oak branch. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since morning, and the forest felt wrong. 23 years of walking these trails, and I'd never felt this particular kind of unease. It wasn't the normal wariness you develop after pulling bodies out of ravines or finding what bears leave behind after a mauling. This was different, deeper. The trees here grew too close together, their branches interlacing overhead like skeletal fingers. Even in broad daylight, the canopy blocked most of the sun, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Moss hung from the branches like funeral shrouds, and the air carried a faint scent of something I couldn't identify, metallic and acrid, like pennies mixed with burning plastic. I stopped at a trail marker and pulled out Jordan's last known coordinates from my breast pocket. 35.6544 degree in N, 83.5055 degree in W, just half a mile northeast of my current position. I'd been over that area 3 times already, but sixth sense or stubborn pride, hell, maybe both, kept pulling me back. The radio crackled again. All units, be advised. Missing person's vehicle has been processed. Nothing suspicious found, but... The voice paused. Subject's research materials included extensive notes on local folklore, specifically something called the Eternal Flame Cult. Base wants all search teams aware of potential religious motivations for subject's disappearance. Over. My blood went cold. Not from the temperature drop, but from recognition. Eternal Flame Cult. I'd heard whispers about that name during my first years as a ranger. Old-timers would mention it in hushed tones during late-night shifts. usually after a few beers loosened their tongues. A religious sect that had supposedly operated in these mountains back in the 1800s. Crazy bastards who worshipped fire and believed human sacrifice fed some kind of flame demon. Most rangers dismissed it as campfire bullshit designed to spook rookies. But I remembered finding the sites. 3 different locations over the years, always deep in the backcountry where civilian hikers rarely ventured. Circular clearings with stones arranged in specific patterns. Scorch marks on the ground that never grew back, even decades later. And once, just once, I'd found bones. Human bones, cracked and blackened from intense heat. The official reports listed them as historical Native American sites of unknown origin. The bones went to the state archaeologist and disappeared into some filing cabinet. Case closed, nothing to see here, move along. But I'd never forgotten the feeling of standing in those clearings. The way the air seemed to shimmer even on cool days. The complete absence of animal sounds. The sensation of being watched by something that had no business existing in the natural world. Unit 23. Acknowledge. Over. I jerked back to the present and keyed the radio. Copy. Base. We'll keep eyes open for any religious indicators. Continuing grid search. Out. Religious indicators. What a fucking joke. As if you could spot a cult member by their Sunday best hiking through the wilderness. I adjusted my pack and continued northeast toward Jordan's last known position. The path here wasn't officially maintained, more of a game trail that meandered between massive boulders and ancient rhododendron thickets. Perfect place for a college kid to get turned around and lost. Or perfect place for something else entirely. The first sign something was seriously wrong came at 2:47 p.m. I was following what looked like fresh boot prints in a muddy section of trail when my nose started burning. Not the normal autumn sense of decomposing leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. This was sharp, chemical, like someone had lit a tire fire and mixed it with sulfur. My nostrils flared involuntarily, trying to process the smell. My eyes began watering, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. Every instinct I'd developed over 2 decades of wilderness work screamed at me to turn around and get the hell out of there. Instead, I pressed forward. The boot prints led off the game trail and into a section of forest I'd never explored. Dense undergrowth gave way to oddly sparse terrain where the trees grew in unnatural patterns. Perfectly straight lines, like someone had planted them according to a blueprint rather than letting nature take its course. My right shoulder blade started twitching involuntarily, a nervous tick I hadn't experienced since my first year on the job. The muscles in my neck felt like piano wires stretched to their breaking point, and I caught myself glancing over my shoulder every few steps. That's when I saw the smoke. Thin, almost transparent wisps rising from somewhere ahead, too organized to be a natural forest fire, too small to be a major blaze. Just smoke, rising straight up despite the afternoon breeze that should have been scattering it. Base, this is Unit 23. I've got eyes on possible campfire smoke. Coordinates. I checked my GPS. 356561 Degran, 835042 Degrabu, investigating. Over. Copy. Unit 23. Be advised, no camping permits issued for that grid sector. Proceed with caution. Over. No camping permits. Of course not. This area was technically off limits to civilian recreation. Too remote, too dangerous, too easy to get lost and never found. So what the hell was someone doing up here? The smoke led me up a steep incline through a section where the trees had been arranged. There was no other word for it. Ancient oaks and maples stood in 2 perfect rows, creating a natural corridor that aimed directly toward whatever was burning ahead. The bark on these trees was wrong too, blackened in spiraling patterns that looked almost like symbols carved deep into the wood. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like I couldn't pull enough oxygen into my lungs. Sweat formed instantly on my forehead despite the cold air, and my vision started to narrow into a tunnel focused solely on the path ahead. I'd been in combat situations during my Army days before joining the Park Service. I knew what adrenaline felt like, knew how to function when your body wanted to freeze or flee, but this was different. This was my nervous system responding to something it recognized as fundamentally wrong, even if my conscious mind couldn't process what that something was. The corridor of trees opened into a circular clearing about 30 yards across. The moment I stepped into it, the temperature jumped 20 degrees, like walking from an air-conditioned building into a sauna. The smell hit me like a physical blow, not just burning plastic and sulfur anymore, but something organic, something that had once been alive. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that made my bladder clench with terror. It wasn't a building exactly, more like a scaffold made from human bones. Femurs and rib cages and skulls arranged in a pyramidal framework that rose 12 feet into the air. The bones weren't ancient archaeological specimens. Some still had bits of flesh clinging to them, and fresh marrow leaked from cracked joints. At the apex of this nightmare construction burned a flame that defied every law of physics I understood. It wasn't orange or yellow like normal fire. This flame was deep purple shot through with veins of silver, and it cast no shadows. The light it gave off made everything in the clearing look like it was underwater, distorted and alien. And suspended inside the flame, arms spread wide in a grotesque crucifixion, was Jordan Matthews. He was still alive. His mouth was open in a scream I couldn't hear, and his eyes, Jesus Christ, his eyes were gone. Burned out sockets that wept blood down his cheeks while the rest of his body remained untouched by the flames. The fire was consuming him from the inside out, starting with his vision and working its way through his nervous system with surgical precision. I tried to move toward him, tried to reach for the radio to call for backup, tried to do anything that might resemble the competent ranger response I'd been trained for. Instead, my muscles locked completely. Every tendon in my body went rigid, like I'd been hit with a massive electrical shock. That's when I saw the others. They emerged from the tree line around the clearing, like smoke given human form. Men and women dressed in simple black robes, their faces hidden by hoods that seemed to absorb light rather than merely casting shadows. There were at least a dozen of them, moving in perfect synchronization toward the bone structure. The one closest to me lowered his hood, and I saw a face that belonged in a medical textbook on severe burn victims. The skin was a patchwork of scar tissue and exposed muscle, with holes where his nose and ears should have been. But his eyes burned with the same purple flame that consumed Jordan Matthews. When he spoke, his voice came from multiple throats at once, like a radio picking up several overlapping frequencies. The ranger arrives as prophesied. The flame requires a guardian to tend its eternal hunger. My vocal cords finally unlocked enough for me to croak out a response. Let him go. Take me instead. The burned man tilted his head with the curious expression of a child examining an insect. The flame does not trade, Ranger. The flame only grows. Your young scholar sought knowledge of our sacred fire. Now he feeds it, and through his sacrifice, our circle grows stronger. I watched Jordan's body convulse inside the purple flames. His fingers spread wide, tendons standing out like cables under his skin. Whatever they were doing to him was beyond torture. It was a systematic destruction of everything that made him human. But you, the burned man continued, you carry something different. Fear seasoned with 2 decades of mountain knowledge. Experience flavored with a protector's instinct. Yes, you will make a far richer offering than the boy. The other robed figures began to chant in a language that hurt to hear. Not because of volume or pitch, but because the sounds seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate directly in my bones. My skeleton vibrated like a tuning fork, and I could feel my teeth starting to loosen in my jaw. The purple flame expanded, reaching out from the bone structure like liquid fire that flowed upward instead of down. Tendrils of it began wrapping around my boots, and I felt heat that went beyond physical sensation. This fire burned more than flesh. It burned memory, personality, everything that made a person distinct from the fuel that fed it. That's when 23 years of ranger training finally kicked in. I ripped the emergency flare from my belt and triggered it in one fluid motion. The bright red light exploded across the clearing, and the chanting cultists recoiled like vampires hit with holy water. The purple flame flickered and dimmed, its tendrils releasing their grip on my legs. Unit 23 to base. Mayday, Mayday. Officer in distress at coordinates 35.656 Guanwanderin N 83 5042 W. Multiple suspects, homicide in progress, need immediate backup and medical. Now, God damn it, now. The burned man snarled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. You only delay the inevitable, Ranger. The flame has tasted you now. It will call you back. He raised his arms and the other cultists began advancing. But the flare's light had done more than just disrupt their ceremony. It had shown me something crucial about the bone structure. Support beams, weight distribution, structural weak points. I'd studied engineering before switching to forestry. I knew how to bring down unstable trees, how to safely demolish damaged buildings, how to identify the exact point where applied force would cause catastrophic failure. The femur bones forming the base of the pyramid were cracked from heat stress. All I needed was to hit the right spot with enough impact. I charged the structure like a linebacker, putting every ounce of my 190 pounds behind my shoulder. The bone framework collapsed in a cascade of snapping calcium and spraying marrow. Jordan's body fell free of the purple flames and hit the ground hard. He was still breathing. Barely, but breathing. The cultists' chanting rose to a shriek of rage, and the purple fire spread across the ground like spilled gasoline. Racing toward where Jordan lay unconscious, I grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him toward the tree line, my back muscles screaming with the effort. The flame eternal burns, the flame eternal hungers, the flame eternal... A gunshot cracked across the clearing, and the burned man's voice cut off mid-chant. Ranger Thompson emerged from the forest with his service weapon drawn, flanked by sheriff's deputies and EMTs. Alex, get Matthews clear, now! I hauled Jordan's limp form behind a massive oak as more shots rang out. The cultists scattered like roaches when you flip on a kitchen light, melting back into the forest with impossible speed. The purple flame guttered and died, leaving only normal fire crackling among the scattered bones. The EMTs took over Jordan's care while I sat against a tree and tried to process what had just happened. My hands shook uncontrollably as I lit a cigarette, and every muscle in my body felt like I'd been electrocuted. Thompson knelt beside me. Jesus, Alex, what did you find up here? I took a long drag and stared at the smoldering remains of the bone structure. Something that's been hiding in these mountains for a lot longer than any of us realized. Jordan Matthews survived, though he never regained his sight. The doctors said the damage to his optic nerves was unlike anything they'd seen, not consistent with fire, chemical burns, or any known form of trauma. His girlfriend, Sarah, stayed with him through months of recovery and therapy. He remembered everything. The official report listed the incident as an assault by unknown subjects practicing unlawful religious activities. The bone structure was documented as evidence and removed by state investigators. The case remained open, but no arrests were ever made. The cultists had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. But I knew they were still out there. Still waiting. Still feeding their eternal flame with whatever victims they could find in the dark corners of these ancient mountains. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Alex Garrison's situation? Comment below. And sometimes on nights when the wind blows just right through the mountain passes, I can still smell that acrid metallic scent. Still feel the purple fire calling to me, promising that next time, there won't be any backup coming through the trees. The flame eternal burns. The flame eternal hungers, and it remembers every soul that got away. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Jordan Matthews. I read every single one. My name is Ryan Cooper, and this was the 6th hour searching for Ashley Williams on the trails of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My breath came out in small, visible puffs in the cold October air, and the muscles in my neck were already rigid like stretched steel cables. The GPS in my hand trembled slightly, not from the cold, but because my fingers couldn't stop contracting involuntarily. Unit 23 to base, I spoke into the radio, my voice coming out hoarser than normal. Grid search of Sector 7 Alpha complete. Negative contact with subject Ashley Williams. Requesting instructions for next sector. Static crackled for 3 seconds before the response. Copy Unit 23, proceed to Sector 8 Bravo. Weather advisory, temperature dropping to 32 degrees at 1800 hours. I should have been focused only on standard procedures. Grid search, sign cutting, follow protocols. But my mind kept returning to 3 years ago, to Emma. To the 16-year-old girl I failed to save because I trusted technology too much and my instincts too little. She was buried now in the municipal cemetery, and I carried the guilt like a stone in my chest that never diminished in weight. Ashley Williams, 22 years old, archaeology student from University of Tennessee, disappeared 18 hours ago during a solo hike on the Cataract Falls Trail. Last known position, coordinates 35.6837 degree N, 83.5312 degree W, approximately 2 kilometers above the main waterfall. She was wearing a red North Face jacket, navy blue Osprey backpack, Merrell hiking boots. iPhone XS found with 23% battery at the trailhead, as if it had been deliberately left behind. What bothered me wasn't just the facts, it was the feeling. That pressure in the air that made my skin tingle, like 1,000 invisible needles touching my arms. The birds were too silent for this time of year, not even a squirrel moving through the dry leaves. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. My phone buzzed, text message from my wife Sarah. Jess wants to know if Daddy will be home to help with math homework. Love you. My fingers went numb trying to type the response. Promise to be home by 8. Tell Jess Daddy always keeps his promises. But even typing it, a dark part of my mind whispered, like Emma? You promised to find her too. Sector 8 Bravo began in an area of dense vegetation, 100-year-old Douglas firs creating a canopy so thick that even at midday, it felt like twilight. I consulted the topographic map on my smartphone. All Trails app showing elevation of 2,947 feet, moderate incline descending toward Old Mill Creek. Historically significant area, first European settlement in the region, dating to 1802. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't Ashley's. They were heavy work boots, probably size 11, with a sole pattern unlike any modern hiking equipment. The strangest thing, the footprints seemed much older than 18 hours. The earth around them was compacted in a way that suggested weeks, maybe months of age. But they were perfectly preserved, as if time had stopped only in that specific location. My peripheral vision disappeared, focusing only on those impossible marks. Cold sweat ran down my neck despite the dropping temperature. I took photos with my phone, but in the images the footprints appeared blurred, distorted, as if the camera refused to record them clearly. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, and my own voice sounded strange in the deathly quiet of the forest. I followed the prints deeper into the woods. They led away from any established trail, down a steep embankment toward what my map showed as unmarked territory. Each step made my breath shorter and more rapid, like I couldn't pull in enough air. The footprints were spaced perfectly, methodically, as if whoever made them never tired, never hurried, never varied their pace. My radio crackled with static, then cleared. Unit 23, what's your 20? I checked my GPS. The coordinates showed 35.6798 degree N, 83.5401 degree W, but that couldn't be right. According to my map, I should be near Old Mill Creek, but I couldn't hear any water, just absolute silence that pressed against my eardrums like cotton. Unit 23 to base, I'm following possible sign. Coordinates 35.6798 degree N, 83.5401 degree W. Unusual footprints leading off trail. Copy that. Exercise caution. You're entering the old settlement area. Lot of unstable terrain down there. Old settlement. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. I'd read about it in the historical surveys required for all Smoky Mountain Rangers, founded in 1802 by a religious sect that practiced unusual burial rituals. The community had vanished mysteriously in 1847, leaving behind only a small cemetery and rumors of a caretaker who refused to leave even after everyone else was gone. The footprints led to a clearing I'd never seen on any map. Ancient headstones jutted from the earth at wrong angles, most so weathered the inscriptions were illegible. But what made my hands shake wasn't the cemetery itself, It was the fresh dirt. Mounds of recently turned earth between the old graves, perfectly rectangular, each exactly 6 feet long. I counted 7 fresh graves. My legs felt like they might give out completely. The logical part of my ranger brain tried to rationalize. Maybe Park Service had done some restoration work, relocated remains for historical preservation. But the irrational part, the part that had been screaming warnings all day, knew better. I approached the nearest fresh mound and saw something that made bile rise in my throat with a metallic taste. A small plastic water bottle, the kind hikers carry, half buried in the loose soil. The label was too dirty to read completely, but I could make out Liam's in faded marker ink. Ashley's water bottle. My hands trembled so violently I could barely key the radio. Unit 23 to base. I need immediate backup at coordinates 35.6798 degree N, 83.540 W. I found possible evidence related to the Williams case. Static, then more static. I checked my phone. No service. The GPS was showing impossible readings now, coordinates that placed me simultaneously in 3 different locations. My watch had stopped at 3:33, though the sun's position suggested it was much later. That's when I heard the digging. The sound came from behind me, rhythmic and deliberate. Metal biting into earth, followed by the wet thump of soil being thrown aside. But when I turned around, the cemetery was empty. The sound continued, getting closer, though I could see no source. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like a trapped animal. Every rational thought I'd ever had as a forest ranger evaporated. This wasn't search and rescue anymore. This was something else entirely. A voice drifted through the trees, ancient and patient. "She's down here, Ranger Cooper. Ashley Williams is down here with all the others." The voice seemed to come from underground, from beneath the fresh graves. Been waiting so long for a ranger to find me. Been digging holes for visitors since 1847. The Park Service keeps sending them to me one by one. I stumbled backward, my vision narrowing to a small tunnel of sight directly ahead. The headstones seemed to shift and lean inward, like curious observers. The digging sounds grew louder, more urgent. "You failed to save Emma, didn't you?" The voice was closer now, almost conversational. "Little 16-year-old Emma who trusted you to bring her home. I remember her. Sweet girl. Fought real hard before she stopped struggling." My knees went weak like water. Emma. This thing knew about Emma. "That's impossible," I whispered, though my voice carried no conviction. "Emma died in the river. Accidental drowning." The medical examiner confirmed. Laughter bubbled up from the earth itself, dry and hollow like wind through empty bones. "Oh, Ranger Cooper, still believing in official reports, still trusting the system that failed you. Emma didn't drown. I needed her for my collection, just like I needed Ashley." The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. I could smell something wrong in the air. Not just decay, but something deeper. Something that had been rotting for over a century. "What are you?" I managed to ask. "I made a bargain in 1847. The cholera was taking everyone in our settlement. Everyone except me. I was the gravedigger, you see. Death and we came to an understanding. I would feed it and it would let me live forever. Been keeping up my end of the deal ever since." A figure emerged from behind the largest headstone. Tall, gaunt, wearing clothes that might have been fashionable in the 1800s, but were now just rotting fabric held together by will. His eyes were holes in his skull, but somehow I could feel him watching me. "The Park Service has been very helpful over the years," he continued, approaching with measured steps. "They send rangers into my territory regularly. Hikers too. Campers. All looking for people who are already down here safe in my collection." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Paralysis crept up from my feet like rising water. "Ashley fought beautifully," he said, now close enough that I could smell centuries of grave dirt on his clothes. "Took her 3 hours to stop clawing at the coffin lid. I do so enjoy the sounds they make in those first few hours. The desperation, the hope slowly dying. My radio suddenly crackled to life. Unit 23, this is base. We show you've been stationary for over 2 hours. What's your status? The gravedigger smiled, revealing teeth like old cemetery monuments. Go ahead, Ranger Cooper. Tell them what you found. Tell them about the fresh graves. About Ashley. About Emma. I lifted the radio with a hand that felt disconnected from my body. Unit 23 to base. I need immediate backup. Multiple 1054 at coordinates. But when I looked at my GPS, it was blank. When I looked at my radio, the display showed no signal. When I looked at the graves, they were empty holes, freshly dug and waiting. Technology is such a fragile thing, the gravedigger observed, especially here, where time moves differently, where the past refuses to stay buried. I understood then. The real horror wasn't that this creature existed. It was that I was going to become part of its collection, and in 3 years, another ranger would stand in this same spot searching for me. Another person carrying guilt would follow impossible footprints to this forgotten cemetery, and they would join me in the dark, while the gravedigger dug fresh holes and waited patiently for the next visitor. Don't worry, Ranger Cooper, he said, producing a shovel that seemed to be made from bone and rust. I'll make sure your family gets the official report. Lost in the woods. Fell into the river. Tragic accident. The Park Service is very understanding about these things. The last thing I remember was the sound of digging and my own voice screaming into a radio that no longer worked, calling for help that would never come. And somewhere in the earth below, Ashley Williams was still clawing at her coffin lid, wondering why no one had found her yet. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Ryan Cooper's situation? Comment below. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Ashley Williams. I read every single one. My name is Samuel Rodriguez, and I should have forgotten the case of Amanda Hayes months ago. But when her mother called me at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday, sobbing into the phone about new evidence and begging me to go back to that goddamn section of Pisgah National Forest, I knew I'd never really stopped thinking about it. Amanda Hayes, 23 years old, disappeared October 15th during what should have been a simple day hike on the Looking Glass Rock Trail. No trace except her Subaru Outback found 3 days later in the Sliding Rock parking area. Keys still in the ignition, hiking pack missing. I'd been a ranger for 15 years. Seen my share of missing hikers, most of them found within 48 hours with stories about getting turned around or injured. Some never found at all, claimed by the mountains in ways that made sense. Hypothermia, falls, getting lost in the endless maze of ridgelines and valleys. Natural deaths for natural reasons. Amanda Hayes felt different from day one. Now, 5 months later, I was driving my Ford F-150 up the winding mountain road at 6:23 a.m., coffee growing cold in the cup holder. My wife Maria's worried, "Be careful, mi amor," still echoing in my head. She'd kissed me goodbye like she always did, but held on a few seconds longer than usual. Even she could feel something wrong with this case. The new evidence Amanda's mother mentioned was a photograph. Some hiker had found an old disposable camera wedged between rocks near Courthouse Falls, about 3 miles off any marked trail. When developed, the roll contained 26 pictures of normal hiking scenery, and one that made my stomach clench when I saw it. Amanda Hayes, very much alive, standing between two people I'd never seen before. A middle-aged man with kind eyes and a woman with a warm smile, both dressed in practical hiking gear. They had their arms around Amanda's shoulders like old friends. She looked relaxed, happy even. The timestamp read, October 15th, 4:17 p.m., 2 hours after her last text message to her mother. Beautiful day, almost to the waterfall, see you tonight. She never made it home. I parked at the Courthouse Falls trailhead and shouldered my pack, 43 pounds of gear I could inventory in my sleep. Garmin GPS, emergency beacon, first aid kit, water purification tablets, 550 paracord, emergency blanket, headlamp, backup batteries, Glock 19 on my hip, though what good a sidearm would do against whatever took Amanda Hayes remained to be seen. The morning air carried that crisp October bite that made the Blue Ridge Mountains famous. Leaves crunched under my Danner boots as I followed the well-marked trail toward the falls. My breath came out in small puffs that dissipated quickly in the dry air. For the first hour, everything felt normal. I'd hiked this trail dozens of times, knew every switchback and stream crossing. The forest sang its usual morning songs, woodpeckers hammering dead trees, squirrels chittering warnings to each other, the distant rush of water over stone. But as I moved deeper into the woods, following my GPS toward the coordinates where the camera had been found, something began to feel off. The bird songs stopped first. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. Instead, they faded gradually, like someone slowly turning down a radio. By the time I realized the forest had gone silent, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened. My shoulders started to tense, muscle fibers contracting like wire cables under stress. I paused on the trail, letting my eyes sweep the tree line. 15 years of backcountry experience had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was watching me. Nothing moved except the slight sway of branches in the breeze. I checked my GPS. Still on course, about half a mile from the camera location. I continued hiking, but my steps became more deliberate, each footfall placed with the careful precision of someone walking through a potential ambush zone. That's when I smelled it. Wood smoke, faint but unmistakable, carried on the morning breeze. Smoke meant people. People meant potential witnesses. People meant answers. I adjusted my pack straps and picked up the pace, following the scent through increasingly dense forest. The official trail had disappeared behind me 20 minutes ago, but I'd marked my route carefully on the GPS. Getting lost wasn't my concern. Getting found was. The smoke smell grew stronger as I climbed a steep ridge covered in mountain laurel and rhododendron. My breathing became more labored, not from exertion, but from something else. A tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with elevation gain. At the ridgeline, I crouched behind a massive oak tree and peered down into the valley below. A small cabin sat in a clearing about 200 yards away. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney, and I could see a vegetable garden, split-rail fence, even laundry hanging on a line. It looked like something from a postcard, the perfect image of self-sufficient mountain living. Two people moved around the property. Even from this distance, I recognized them immediately. The man and woman from the photograph, the ones with their arms around Amanda Hayes. My heart rate spiked, sending a surge of adrenaline through my system that made my hands shake slightly. After 5 months of dead ends and sleepless nights, I'd found them. I pulled out my binoculars for a closer look. The man appeared to be in his 50s, dressed in flannel and jeans, splitting firewood with the easy rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The woman, maybe late 40s, tended the garden with a basket tucked under her arm. They looked like any other mountain couple living off the grid, except they were the last people to see Amanda Hayes alive. I spent 20 minutes observing them, noting details. No vehicles visible, which meant they'd either hiked in, or there was a road I couldn't see from my position. The cabin itself looked well maintained but old, probably built decades ago by someone's grandfather and passed down through the family. Normal people doing normal things. So why did my skin feel like it was crawling with insects? I keyed my radio to call in my location, but got only static. Not unusual in these mountains. Radio communications were spotty at best once you got away from the main trails. My cell phone showed no bars, also expected. I was on my own. Moving carefully down the ridge, I approached the cabin from the north side, using trees and underbrush for concealment. Standard protocol when dealing with potentially dangerous individuals was to call for backup, but something told me these people would vanish like smoke if I left to get help. I had to talk to them now. 50 yards from the cabin, I stepped on a dry branch that snapped with a crack like a gunshot. Both people looked up immediately, scanning the forest with the sharp alertness of prey animals sensing a predator. No point in hiding now. I stepped into the clearing with my hands visible, badge displayed prominently on my chest. "Morning, folks." I'm Samuel Rodriguez, park ranger. Sorry to bother you, but I'm investigating a missing person case and I was hoping you might be able to help me. The man set down his axe and walked toward me with a friendly smile that reached his eyes. Well, I'll be damned. A ranger way out here. You must be lost, friend. Not lost, I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. I'm looking for information about a hiker who went missing in this area last October. Young woman named Amanda Hayes. The woman had stopped tending her garden and was watching us with interest. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached with the same warm demeanor as her husband. "Oh my," she said, her voice carrying genuine concern. "That's terrible. We don't see many hikers this far off the main trails, but we'd certainly remember if we'd encountered anyone in distress." Everything about them seemed normal, concerned, helpful. But my hands had started to sweat despite the cool morning air, palms becoming slick with moisture that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Some primitive part of my brain was screaming warnings that my rational mind couldn't process. "The thing is," I continued, pulling out the photograph, "we have evidence that suggests otherwise." I handed them the picture. They examined it together, heads close, whispering softly. When they looked up, their expressions had changed subtly. Still friendly, but with something else underneath. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up despite my fleece jacket. "Well, would you look at that?" the man said with a chuckle. "That does appear to be us. You know, now that I see the picture, I do remember meeting a young lady on the trail, a sweet girl. Very enthusiastic about the local wildlife. She asked us about the best spots for photography," the woman added. We pointed her toward some scenic overlooks further north. "What time was this?" I asked. "Oh, mid-afternoon maybe? Hard to say for sure. Time moves differently up here." Their story was plausible, helpful even. So why did my throat feel like it was constricting, making each breath a conscious effort? "Would you mind if I asked your names just for my report?" "Of course," the man said. "I'm Harold and this is my wife Elizabeth. We've been living up here for, what would you say, Beth? 20 years now?" "Closer to 25, she corrected with a loving smile. "Time flies when you're happy." They were saying all the right things. Their body language was open, cooperative. Any reasonable person would conclude they were innocent hikers who'd encountered Amanda Hayes and pointed her in a direction that ultimately led to her disappearance somewhere else. But every nerve in my body was firing warning signals. "This is quite a remote location," I observed. "How do you get supplies? Is there a road nearby?" "Oh, we're quite self-sufficient," Elizabeth said proudly. "Harold's an excellent hunter, and I've got my garden. We make trips to town maybe once a month, stock up on necessities. There's an old logging road about 2 miles east that connects to Highway 276. Again, perfectly reasonable. Mountain people living off the grid wasn't uncommon in this part of North Carolina. I don't suppose you'd have any other photographs from that day? Maybe something that might help us figure out which direction Amanda went after she left you?" Harold scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I'm afraid not. We're not much for cameras ourselves. But I'll tell you what. Why don't you come inside for some coffee? You look like you could use warming up, and maybe we can put our heads together and think of anything else that might help." The invitation was delivered with such genuine warmth that refusing would seem rude. But something about the idea of entering their cabin made my stomach clench like I'd swallowed ice water. "That's very kind of you, but I should probably continue my search while there's still daylight." "Nonsense," Elizabeth insisted. "You've hiked a long way to get here. At least let me pack you some food for the trail. I've got fresh bread and some venison jerky Harold made last week." Before I could politely decline, she was already walking toward the cabin, motioning for us to follow. Harold fell into step beside me, maintaining a steady stream of friendly chatter about the weather, the wildlife, the challenges of mountain living. Normal conversation that should have put me at ease. Instead, my vision started to narrow, peripheral awareness fading as my brain focused intensely on potential threats. Everything looked sharper, more defined, like someone had adjusted the contrast on reality. The cabin's interior was exactly what you'd expect from a rural mountain home. Wood-burning stove, handmade furniture, mason jars full of preserved vegetables lining rough-hewn shelves. Oil lamps provided warm, flickering light that cast dancing shadows on log walls. "Make yourself comfortable," Harold said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. "Beth'll have that coffee ready in no time." I remained standing, positioning myself where I could see both the front door and what appeared to be a back entrance through the kitchen. Basic tactical awareness that had become second nature after years of dealing with unpredictable situations in remote locations. Elizabeth busied herself at the wood-burning stove, humming softly as she prepared coffee. The domestic scene was so perfectly normal it felt almost staged. "You mentioned Amanda asked about wildlife," I said, pulling out my notebook. "What specifically was she interested in?" "Oh, the usual things young people ask about," Harold replied. "Bears, wildcats, whether it was safe to camp alone." We told her the standard precautions: hang your food, make noise while hiking, that sort of thing. "Did she mention where she was planning to camp?" "I don't believe she said specifically, just that she wanted to find somewhere off the beaten path for better photography opportunities." Elizabeth turned from the stove with a steaming mug. "Here you go, Ranger Rodriguez. I hope you like it strong." The coffee smelled incredible, rich and dark with hints of cinnamon. I accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. But I didn't drink. Something Harold had said bothered me. Something about... "Wait," I said. "How did you know my name? I introduced myself as a park ranger, but I never told you my last name." The couple exchanged a quick glance, so brief I almost missed it. When Harold smiled again, it seemed forced. "Did you? I thought you mentioned it when you first approached." Maybe I misheard. My grip tightened on the coffee mug. My mind raced back through our conversation. I was absolutely certain I'd only identified myself as a park ranger. Actually, I'm quite sure I didn't. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Elizabeth continued stirring something on the stove, her humming taking on a slightly different tune. Harold maintained his friendly expression, but his eyes had grown cold. "You know," he said finally, "you might be right. Maybe we heard your name from someone else. Word travels fast in these mountains." "From who?" "Oh, you know how it is. Hikers talk to each other. Stories get passed around. Your Amanda probably mentioned meeting other rangers on the trail, but Amanda Hayes had never met any other rangers. I'd checked the duty rosters. I was the first official search team member to reach this area. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like my lungs couldn't quite remember how to work properly. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. "I think I should head back," I said, setting the untouched coffee on a side table. "Thank you for your time." "Oh, but you just got here," Elizabeth said without turning around. "And I'm just finishing up some lunch. You really should eat something before that long hike back." "I appreciate the offer, but I insist," Harold said, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. For the first time since entering the cabin, I let my hand drift casually toward my sidearm. The Glock felt reassuring under my fingers, a solid reminder that I wasn't completely helpless. "Actually, Harold, I need to ask you something directly. Have you seen this woman since that day in October?" I pulled out my phone and showed them Amanda's official missing person photo, a smiling headshot her mother had provided. Both of them leaned in to look at the screen. Their reactions were subtle but unmistakable. Harold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Elizabeth's stirring motion paused for just a beat. "No," Elizabeth said softly. "Just that one time on the trail," but her voice carried the slight tremor of someone who wasn't telling the truth. "The thing is," I continued, "that photograph was taken with a disposable camera, the kind that timestamps every shot. And according to that timestamp, you met Amanda at 4:17 p.m. on October 15th. But her cell phone records show her last text message was sent at 2:43 p.m. from a location 6 miles north of here. I was bluffing about the cell records. The phone had never been recovered. but their faces told me everything I needed to know. Cell phone signals can be unreliable in these mountains, Harold said carefully. Messages sometimes delay for hours before sending. True, I acknowledged, but there's another problem. I hiked here from the Courthouse Falls trailhead, following Amanda's most likely route based on witness statements and her known hiking experience. There's no way she could have covered that distance and still ended up here by 4:17 p.m. The cabin fell completely silent except for the crackling of the fire and Elizabeth's increasingly agitated stirring. Unless, I continued, she didn't hike here at all, unless someone brought her here. Harold's friendly demeanor finally cracked. His smile disappeared, replaced by something calculating and cold. That's quite an accusation, Ranger Rodriguez. It's not an accusation, it's an observation, and I think it's time I contacted my supervisor and requested backup for a more thorough investigation of this area. I pulled out my radio, knowing it wouldn't work, but hoping the gesture would convince them to let me leave peacefully. Instead, Harold laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," he said. Elizabeth turned from the stove, and her warm smile had been replaced by something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. She was holding a large kitchen knife. "You see, Samuel," Harold continued, "we've worked very hard to build a peaceful life here. We can't have people disturbing that peace with uncomfortable questions and unwanted attention." Every muscle in my body went rigid, like someone had flipped a switch that turned me into a statue. This was the moment every law enforcement officer dreaded, the moment when a routine investigation turned deadly. "What happened to Amanda Hayes?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Amanda was a gift," Elizabeth said, her voice taking on an almost dreamy quality. Young, pure, full of life force, she served her purpose beautifully. Which was? To help us maintain the balance, Harold explained. "You see, Samuel, there are forces in these mountains that most people don't understand. Ancient forces that require offerings to keep the peace." My hand was now resting openly on my pistol grip, but I hadn't drawn yet. 2 against 1 in an enclosed space with Elizabeth between me and the only exit I could see clearly. "You're talking about murder." "We're talking about necessity," Harold corrected. "About sacrifice for the greater good." Amanda understood in the end. They always do. "They?" Elizabeth giggled, a sound that raised goosebumps along my arms. "Oh, you didn't think Amanda was the first, did you? We've been caretakers of this place for 25 years, Samuel. The mountains have been very generous to us in return for our service." My mind reeled. 25 years. How many hikers had disappeared in this area during that time? How many missing person cases had been written off as accidents or people simply vanishing into the wilderness? "The authorities will come looking for me," I said. "Eventually," Harold agreed. "But this is a big forest and you're a long way from any official trail. By the time they find your truck at the trailhead, we'll be long gone. We've had to relocate before." "And you'll set up shop somewhere else? Find new hunting grounds?" "The mountains provide," Elizabeth said simply. "They always have." I had to make a decision, draw my weapon and try to fight my way out, or look for another option. The knife in Elizabeth's hand suggested they were serious about not letting me leave alive. But something about their confidence bothered me. They were acting like this was routine, like they'd done it dozens of times before, which meant they probably had. "Before we proceed," Harold said conversationally, "I'm curious about something. How did you really find us? The camera story is clever, but we both know that's not the whole truth." He was right. I had omitted one crucial detail. Amanda's mother hired a private investigator 3 months ago. He's been tracking unusual disappearances in this area going back 20 years. Found a pattern of missing hikers whose cases were never properly investigated. This was partially true. Amanda's mother had mentioned wanting to hire a PI, but as far as I knew, she hadn't followed through. "And this investigator shared his findings with you?" "He shared them with the FBI." Harold's expression darkened. "I think you're lying." "Maybe, but are you willing to bet your freedom on it?" Elizabeth had moved closer, positioning herself to cut off my path to the door. The knife in her hand was at least 8 inches long, designed for butchering game. "You know what I think, Samuel?" Harold said. "I think you came here alone without telling anyone where you were going because you wanted to be the hero who solved the big case. And now you're trying to bluff your way out of a situation that has only one ending." He was probably right. I had told Maria I was following up on a lead, but I hadn't been specific about the location. My supervisor thought I was doing routine patrol work in a completely different section of the forest. If I disappeared, it might be days before anyone came looking in the right area. "What did you do with her body?" I asked. "Who says we did anything with it?" Elizabeth replied. "The mountains take what they're offered. Amanda became part of something larger than herself. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get." Harold started moving toward me, staying just far enough away to avoid a quick grab for the knife, but close enough to react if I went for my gun. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to remove that pistol very slowly and place it on the floor. Then you're going to sit down while Elizabeth and I decide how to proceed. And if I don't? Then this becomes much more unpleasant for everyone involved." I had run out of options. In the space of 20 minutes, a routine investigation had turned into a life-or-death situation in a remote cabin with 2 people who had apparently been murdering hikers for decades. My training kicked in. When faced with imminent threat, create distance, seek cover, call for help if possible, use minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat. Distance was impossible in the small cabin. Cover was limited. Help was miles away with no communication. That left force. "Okay," I said, raising my hands slightly. "Let's all stay calm here. Nobody needs to get hurt." "That depends entirely on your cooperation," Harold replied. "Before I do anything, I need to know, is Amanda Hayes still alive?" Elizabeth laughed again, that same chilling giggle that made my stomach turn. "Define alive," she said. "I need to see her." "I'm afraid that's not possible." "Then we have a problem." I drew my pistol in one smooth motion, training the barrel on Harold while using my peripheral vision to track Elizabeth's position. 15 years of quarterly firearms qualifications had made the movement automatic. "I need both of you to drop any weapons and move away from each other," I commanded. "Now." Elizabeth looked genuinely surprised, like she hadn't expected me to fight back. Harold, however, seemed almost amused. "That's not going to help you, Samuel. It's going to help me a lot more than standing here unarmed. You misunderstand the situation." "I understand it perfectly. You're suspected of multiple homicides, and I'm placing you both under arrest." "With what authority?" Harold asked. "You're outside your jurisdiction, alone, with no backup, no communication, and no witnesses. Even if you manage to kill both of us, who's going to believe your story?" He was right about the jurisdiction issue. National Forest Service rangers had law enforcement authority, but the legal complexities of an armed confrontation in this situation would be a nightmare to sort out later. If there was a later. "I'm willing to take that risk," I said. "Are you willing to risk never finding out what happened to Amanda Hayes?" That stopped me cold. My primary mission was to find Amanda, or at least discover her fate. If I killed the only 2 people who knew what had happened to her, that information would die with them. "What's it going to be, Samuel?" Elizabeth asked, still holding the knife but no longer advancing. "Pull that trigger and live the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved her, or put the gun down and maybe learn the truth." It was a devil's bargain. Risk my life for information that might not even be true. But Amanda Hayes' mother deserved answers. "Show me where she is," I said, keeping the pistol trained on Harold. "Take me to her and then we'll discuss terms." "Terms?" Harold laughed. "You're not in a position to negotiate terms. I'm the one with the gun, and we're the ones with the information you need." We stared at each other for several long seconds. The cabin felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. "There's something you need to understand about this place, Samuel, about the real reason hikers disappear in these mountains. It's not what you think." "Enlighten me." "The Cherokee people who lived here before the white settlers arrived knew the truth. They knew about the hungry spirits that dwell in the deep forest, spirits that feed on human essence, human life force. You're talking about ghosts? I'm talking about entities far older than human civilization. Things that were here when these mountains were young. The Cherokee made agreements with them, offered sacrifices to keep them satisfied. And you've taken over that responsibility. Someone has to, Harold said. When the Cherokee were driven out, the agreements remained. The entities remained. The hunger remained. So you've been feeding people to forest spirits for 25 years. We've been maintaining the balance, Elizabeth corrected. Keeping the really dangerous things contained in the deep woods where they can't threaten the broader population. I stared at them, trying to determine if they actually believed what they were saying, or if this was an elaborate justification for serial murder. That's insane. Is it? Harold asked. How many unexplained disappearances occur in national forests every year, Samuel? How many people simply vanish without a trace, leaving behind no evidence, no remains, no logical explanation? He had a point. The statistics were disturbing. Hundreds of people disappeared in national parks and forests annually, with a significant percentage never found, despite extensive search efforts. Most of those have rational explanations, I said. Most, but not all, and the ones that don't, the ones where experienced hikers vanish in perfect weather conditions, leaving behind no trail, no evidence, no trace. What's your rational explanation for those? I didn't have one. Those cases haunted every search and rescue professional. Even if what you're saying is true, I said, that doesn't give you the right to murder innocent people. Innocent? Elizabeth's voice took on a bitter edge. Amanda Hayes wasn't innocent. None of them are truly innocent. What's that supposed to mean? Tell him about Amanda's research, Harold said to his wife. Elizabeth set the knife down on the counter, but remained where she could quickly retrieve it. Amanda Hayes wasn't just a random hiker, Samuel. She was here investigating the disappearances. She'd been corresponding with families of missing people, collecting information, building a database of unexplained vanishings. My blood ran cold. How do you know that? Because she told us. She sought us out specifically, thinking we might have information about the local legends. She wanted to interview us about Cherokee folklore and stories of supernatural activity in these mountains. So you killed her to protect yourselves? We killed her because she was going to expose things that should remain hidden, Harold said. Forces that are contained only through careful management and regular tribute. You're both completely insane, are we? Or are we the only ones sane enough to understand the reality of what exists in these mountains? Elizabeth picked up the knife again. There's only one way to settle this question, Samuel. Let us show you the truth. I'm not going anywhere with you. Then you'll never know what really happened to Amanda Hayes. You'll never be able to give her family the answers they deserve. They had me trapped in an impossible situation. Everything in my training and experience said to neutralize the immediate threat and worry about the consequences later. But the investigator in me needed to know the truth about Amanda. What exactly are you proposing? Come with us to the place where Amanda made her final offering, Harold said. See for yourself what exists in these mountains. Then decide whether we're murderers or caretakers. And if I don't like what I see, then you're free to arrest us, kill us, whatever you think is appropriate. Elizabeth nodded in agreement. But you have to see it first. You have to understand. I kept the pistol trained on them while considering the options. All logic said this was a trap designed to get me away from the cabin and into a more isolated location where they could overpower me. But what if they were telling the truth? What if there really was something in these mountains that explained the disappearances? Where is this place? About half a mile north of here. There's a clearing that the Cherokee considered sacred ground. It's where the entities are strongest. And Amanda's body? You'll see. I made a decision that probably violated every principle of tactical safety I'd ever learned. We're going to do this very carefully. Harold, you're going to walk ahead of me at least 10 feet. Elizabeth, you're going to follow behind me also at least 10 feet. Anyone makes a sudden move, anyone tries anything clever, and I start shooting. Understood? They both nodded. And Elizabeth, leave the knife here. She hesitated, then placed the blade on the kitchen counter. Lead the way, I said to Harold. We left the cabin in single file, with me maintaining a clear line of sight to both of them. The afternoon sun was getting lower, casting longer shadows through the forest. If this took much longer, I'd be hiking out in darkness, assuming I lived long enough to hike out at all. Harold led us along what appeared to be a game trail, winding through dense stands of mountain laurel and rhododendron. The forest felt different than it had earlier in the day, quieter, more oppressive. Even the air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. After about 20 minutes of hiking, we crested a small ridge and descended into a circular clearing surrounded by massive old-growth trees. Ancient oaks and hickories that had probably been standing when the Cherokee still lived in these mountains. In the center of the clearing was a ring of stones arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. The grass inside the circle was brown and dead, despite the lush green vegetation surrounding it. This is the place, Harold said softly. I don't see any body. Look closer, Elizabeth whispered. I approached the stone circle cautiously, keeping my weapon ready. At first I saw nothing unusual except the dead grass. But as I got closer, details began to emerge. Scattered throughout the circle were small objects, personal items, a hiking boot, a water bottle, a cell phone case, a pair of sunglasses, and bones. Human bones, bleached white by exposure. Jesus Christ, I breathed. Not just Amanda, Harold said. This place has been receiving offerings for longer than our time here. We simply continued the tradition. How many people? We don't keep count. The entities take what they need. I stared at the bone fragments scattered throughout the circle. Some looked old, weathered by years of exposure. Others appeared more recent. This is a mass grave. This is a sacred site, Elizabeth corrected. A place where the barrier between our world and theirs is thin. Where what is thin? The spirits that inhabit the deep forest. The entities that feed on human life force. As if summoned by her words, the temperature in the clearing suddenly dropped at least 10 degrees. My breath became visible in small puffs, and frost began forming on the grass around the stone circle. What the hell? They know you're here, Harold said. They can sense your life force. The air inside the circle began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but instead of rising, the distortion seemed to be descending from somewhere above. This isn't possible, I muttered. Possible or not, it's happening, Elizabeth said. The question is whether you're going to accept the truth, or keep denying what your eyes are telling you. The shimmering intensified, and I began to see shapes forming in the distorted air. Tall, elongated figures that seemed to be made of shadow and mist rather than solid matter. What are they? The ancient ones, the hungry ones, the entities that have dwelt in these mountains since before human memory. One of the shadow figures turned in my direction, and I felt a pressure inside my skull, like someone was pressing against my brain with icy fingers. They want to know why you're here, Harold said, whether you're an offering or an obstacle. I'm neither. I'm a law enforcement officer investigating disappearances. The pressure in my head intensified, and I began to hear whispers in a language I didn't recognize. The words seemed to bypass my ears entirely and speak directly to my mind. He seeks the one who came before, the young one who carried light in her soul. They remember Amanda, Elizabeth translated. They remember her essence, her energy. Where is she? The shadow figures moved closer to the edge of the stone circle, and the whispers became more urgent. She feeds us still. She sustains us still. She is part of us now, as all offerings become part of us. She's dead, I said. Death is a human concept, Harold replied. These entities exist beyond such limitations. Amanda's consciousness, her life force, continues to exist as part of their collective being. That's not possible. The largest shadow figure extended what might have been an arm in my direction. and suddenly I could see Amanda Hayes as clearly as if she were standing in front of me. But it wasn't the Amanda from the missing person photos. This version of her looked different, older, sadder, with eyes that held knowledge no human should possess. "Sam," she said, and her voice carried the weight of infinite sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here. Amanda, are you really alive?" "I'm something. I don't know if alive is the right word anymore. Your mother sent me to find you. She's been looking for you for months." "I know. I can feel her grief, her love, her desperation. It's one of the few human emotions I can still access. We need to get you out of here." Amanda's image flickered like a television with poor reception. "I can't leave, Sam. I'm part of them now. My consciousness, my memories, my essence. It's all woven into their collective being. There has to be a way." "There is," she said, "but you won't like it. Tell me." "The entities require regular offerings to maintain their strength and remain contained in this area. Without those offerings, they grow weak and eventually fade away. But they also become desperate, willing to expand their hunting grounds to find sustenance. So, if I stop Harold and Elizabeth from bringing them victims, the entities will spread throughout the forest, seeking life force wherever they can find it. Hundreds of hikers, campers, and hunters could die before they're finally destroyed. How many people have Harold and Elizabeth killed? Dozens over the years, but their deaths have kept thousands of others safe." I stared at the shadow figures surrounding the stone circle. They pulsed with malevolent energy, radiating hunger and ancient intelligence. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Harold and Elizabeth were telling the truth. They're not just murderers, they're guardians, caretakers of something that must be contained. There has to be another way. Maybe, but it would require a sacrifice that I don't think you're prepared to make." "What kind of sacrifice?" Amanda's image began to fade. "Someone would have to take their place, become the new caretaker, accept responsibility for maintaining the balance." "For how long?" "Forever." The shadow figures began to retreat back into the shimmering distortion, and Amanda's image faded until only her voice remained. "Choose carefully, Sam. The consequences of your decision will affect more people than you can imagine." Then she was gone, and the clearing returned to normal. The temperature rose back to comfortable levels, the frost disappeared, and the air stopped shimmering. I stood in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just experienced. "Now you understand," Harold said quietly. "I understand that I just hallucinated a conversation with a dead woman. Did you? Or did you just receive information that your rational mind refuses to accept?" I looked down at the bone fragments scattered throughout the stone circle, physical evidence of multiple deaths over many years. "Even if what I saw was real," I said, "it doesn't justify murder." "Doesn't it?" Elizabeth asked. "If killing one person prevents the deaths of hundreds, isn't that the moral choice?" "That's not how the law works." "The law," Harold said with bitter laughter, "is a human construct designed to govern human behavior. What we're dealing with here exists beyond human law." I holstered my pistol and pulled out my radio, knowing it wouldn't work but needing to try anyway. "I'm calling for backup and a forensics team. This is a crime scene." "You can try," Harold said. "But by the time they arrive, Elizabeth and I will be gone, and you'll be left trying to explain to your superiors why you believe in forest spirits." He was right. My report would sound like the ravings of someone who'd suffered a psychological breakdown. No one would believe the story about supernatural entities feeding on human life force. "What happens if I let you go?" "We continue our work. We find a new location, establish new hunting grounds, maintain the balance. And the murders continue. The sacrifices continue. The greater population remains safe." I looked around the clearing, trying to find some evidence that would support my eventual report. But aside from the bone fragments, there was nothing that couldn't be explained by natural causes. "There's another option," Elizabeth said. "Which is? Join us. Become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. You want me to help you kill people?" We want you to help us protect people. All the people who hike these mountains without knowing what exists in the deep forest. All the families who would lose loved ones if the entities spread beyond this area. I took an oath to protect and serve. That doesn't include murder. Sometimes protection requires difficult choices, Harold said. Sometimes serving the greater good means accepting individual tragedies. I walked to the edge of the stone circle and knelt down to examine one of the bone fragments more closely. It was definitely human, part of a femur, probably from a young adult. Amanda Hayes, or one of the other victims whose families were still searching for answers. How do I know you're telling the truth about any of this? I asked. How do I know you haven't just constructed an elaborate justification for serial killing? You saw them, Elizabeth said. You spoke with Amanda. You felt their presence. I saw something. I'm not sure what. Then you have to decide whether to trust your experience or dismiss it as hallucination. I stood up and faced them, two people who looked like ordinary mountain folk, but claimed to be guardians against supernatural forces. If I arrest you, and the entities spread beyond this area, how many people will die? We don't know, Harold admitted. But based on historical patterns, when the balance has been disrupted in other locations, it could be hundreds. And if I let you continue, how many more people will you kill? As few as possible. We don't take pleasure in what we do, Samuel. We take only what's necessary to maintain containment. How many per year? 4 or 5, usually. Young, healthy individuals with strong life force. That's 4 or 5 families destroyed annually. Compared to hundreds of families destroyed if the entities spread, Elizabeth said. It was an impossible moral equation. Sacrifice a few to save many, or uphold the law and potentially doom hundreds of innocent people. I need time to think about this. Time is something we don't have, Harold said. You've found us, which means our location is compromised. We need to relocate tonight. And if I try to stop you, then you'll have to kill us both and live with the consequences of that decision. I looked back at the stone circle one more time. The bone fragments seemed to gleam in the fading afternoon light, each one representing a life cut short, a family destroyed, dreams and hopes extinguished. But if Harold and Elizabeth were telling the truth, those individual tragedies had prevented much larger ones. I want to see the bodies, I said finally. What bodies? The complete remains. You said the entities feed on life force, not physical matter. So where are the bodies? Harold and Elizabeth exchanged glances. They're disposed of carefully, Harold said. Buried in remote locations where they'll never be found. Show me. That would take hours, and we need to leave before dark. Then we have a problem, because I'm not making any decisions until I see physical evidence of your claims. Another long silence. There's something else, Elizabeth said finally. Something we haven't told you about Amanda. What? She isn't completely gone. Part of her consciousness remains accessible through the entities. If you join us, if you become a caretaker, you could communicate with her regularly. You're telling me I could talk to her spirit? More than that, you could learn from her experience, understand the true nature of what we're dealing with here. And all I have to do is help you murder innocent people. Help us maintain the balance that keeps thousands of people safe. The sun was getting lower, and the forest around us was beginning to darken. Soon I'd be hiking out in complete darkness, assuming I made it out at all. I need to radio my position to headquarters, I said. Your radio won't work here. It never has. Then I need to hike back to an area with cell coverage and call for backup. Of course, Harold said. But consider this. By the time you return with help, we'll be long gone, and the entities will still be here, hungry, and waiting for the next offering. Maybe the authorities can find a way to deal with them. How? With what weapons? What strategy? You can't fight supernatural forces with conventional tactics. He had a point. Even if I brought back a full tactical team, what could they do against entities that existed beyond physical reality? There's one more thing you should know, Elizabeth said, about the real reason Amanda came here. You said she was investigating disappearances. She was, but she was also running from something. Someone who'd been stalking her for months, making threats, following her. Who? Her ex-boyfriend, a man with a history of violence who'd sworn to kill her if he couldn't have her. How do you know this? Because she told us. She was hiding in these mountains, hoping he wouldn't find her here. And did he? He tracked her to our cabin 3 days after we took her in. We found him outside our property with a gun, waiting for her to emerge. What happened to him? He became an offering, Harold said simply. The entities don't discriminate. They accept anyone with sufficient life force. So you killed Amanda's stalker too? We protected her from him. Unfortunately, the entities required both offerings to maintain their strength. That's convenient. It's the truth, and it illustrates the complexity of what we deal with. Sometimes the people who become offerings are genuinely bad people. Sometimes they're innocent victims of circumstance. Either way, the entities must be fed. I struggled to process this new information. If Amanda Hayes had been fleeing from a violent stalker, the official investigation had missed that completely. Her disappearance had been treated as a routine missing hiker case. Do you have any proof of this stalker's existence? His vehicle is still hidden about 2 miles from here. We never got around to disposing of it. Show me. There isn't time. Make time. If you want me to believe your story, I need evidence. Harold sighed. Follow me. But we do this quickly. We left the clearing and hiked deeper into the forest, following another faint game trail. The shadows were getting longer, and I began to worry about finding my way back to my truck in the dark. After about 15 minutes, Harold led us to a steep ravine hidden by dense undergrowth. At the bottom, partially concealed by fallen branches and brush, was a blue Honda Civic with New York plates. David Morrison, Elizabeth said. That was his name, Amanda's ex-boyfriend. I climbed down into the ravine and examined the vehicle. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside, I found a New York driver's license with the name David Morrison and a photo that matched Harold's description of a young man in his 20s. More disturbing was what else I found in the car. Detailed maps of the area with hiking trails marked in red. Printed photos of Amanda Hayes, some clearly taken without her knowledge. A journal filled with increasingly violent fantasies about what he planned to do to her. And a loaded .38 revolver in the glove compartment. This doesn't prove he was here to hurt her, I said, though the evidence was pretty damning. Read the last journal entry, Elizabeth suggested. I flipped to the final pages. The handwriting became increasingly erratic and angry. Found her trail. She thinks she can hide from me in these fucking mountains. Tomorrow I'm going to show her what happens to bitches who think they can just disappear. Going to make her pay for every day she's made me suffer. When I'm done with her, nobody will ever find the body. The entry was dated October 18th, 3 days after Amanda's disappearance. He was definitely here to hurt her, I admitted. And we stopped him, Harold said, along with saving Amanda from a violent death at his hands. But you killed her anyway. We gave her to the entities, Elizabeth corrected. Her death served a greater purpose than simply satisfying one man's rage. I climbed back out of the ravine, my mind reeling. The evidence suggested that David Morrison had indeed been stalking Amanda Hayes, had tracked her to this remote area, and had been planning to murder her. But that didn't justify what Harold and Elizabeth had done. Even if Morrison was here to hurt Amanda, I said, you could have helped her escape. Called the authorities, found another solution. With what communication? You've seen how isolated this area is. By the time we could have summoned help, Morrison would have found her. So you appointed yourselves judge, jury, and executioner. We made the choice that saved the most lives, Harold said. Morrison would have killed Amanda, and probably other women in the future. The entities required sustenance anyway. It was an efficient solution. You're talking about human beings like they're livestock. We're talking about maintaining a balance that protects thousands of innocent people from supernatural predators. The sun had dropped below the tree line, and the forest was rapidly darkening. I needed to make a decision soon, or I'd be hiking out in complete darkness. "I want to see Amanda's body," I said. "We've told you. The entities consume everything except bones and personal items." "Then show me her bones. Show me something that proves she's actually dead." Harold and Elizabeth exchanged another look. "There's a problem with that," Elizabeth said. "Which is?" "Amanda's remains are in the sacred circle, but accessing them would require permission from the entities." "Permission?" "The bones of offerings become part of the sacred site. Disturbing them without proper ritual could anger the entities and disrupt the containment." "That's convenient." "It's the truth, and even if we could show you her remains, what would that prove? That we killed her? You already know that. It would prove she's actually dead, and not just part of some elaborate hoax. You spoke with her yourself. You saw her spirit." "I saw something. I'm still not sure what." The forest around us was now completely dark except for the faint light from my flashlight. Time was running out. "I need to get back to my truck," I said. "Of course," Harold said, "but first you need to make a decision." "About what?" "About whether you're going to arrest us, kill us, or join us. Those aren't the only options. Actually, they are. You've seen too much, learned too much to simply walk away. The entities won't allow it." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that once you've been exposed to their presence, once you've entered their sacred space, you become part of their sphere of influence. They'll know where you are, what you're doing, who you're with." "You're saying they'll follow me?" "I'm saying they'll be aware of you. And if you pose a threat to their feeding grounds, they'll take steps to eliminate that threat." "How?" "They have ways of influencing human behavior, causing accidents, creating circumstances that lead to death or madness." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? How many people who've investigated supernatural phenomena have met with mysterious accidents or sudden psychological breakdowns?" I didn't have an answer for that, but the implication was clear. They were threatening me with supernatural retaliation if I didn't cooperate. "Let's say I believe everything you've told me," I said. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Join us," Elizabeth said. "Become a caretaker. Help us maintain the balance." "For how long?" "Until you find suitable replacements. Train them, pass on the knowledge, ensure continuity." "And how many people would I have to help kill?" "As few as necessary. The entities' needs vary based on their energy levels and external factors. Give me a number." 4 to 6 per year on average. That's mass murder." "That's species preservation," Harold said. "Keeping humanity safe from forces it doesn't understand and couldn't fight." I stood in the darkness, weighing impossible choices. Arrest them and potentially unleash supernatural entities on the broader population. Kill them and face the same consequences. Join them and become an accessory to serial murder. Or find a fourth option. "What if there was another way to feed the entities?" I asked. "Something that didn't require killing people?" "Such as?" "I don't know. Animals? Artificial life force? Some kind of technology?" "We've experimented with alternatives over the years," Elizabeth said. "Nothing else provides the specific type of energy they require." "What makes human life force special?" "Consciousness, self-awareness, the complexity of human emotions and memories. Animals have life force, but it's not sophisticated enough to sustain entities of this level." "And artificial alternatives?" "Don't exist. At least, not with current technology. I was running out of ideas and running out of time." "I need to contact my headquarters," I said finally. "I've told you your radio won't work here. Then I need to hike back to an area with coverage." "That would be a mistake," Harold said quietly. "Why?" "Because the entities have already marked you. If you leave this area without their permission, without completing your business here, they'll follow you. And if I stay, then you have a chance to negotiate with them, to find a solution that serves everyone's interests." "Including Amanda's?" "Amanda is beyond help, but her spirit could find peace if her death serves a greater purpose." I looked back toward the clearing where we'd left the stone circle. Even in the darkness, I could feel something watching from that direction, a presence that made my skin crawl and my primitive brain scream warnings. What kind of negotiation are you talking about? The entities communicate through the sacred circle. If you're willing to enter it alone, to expose yourself to their direct influence, they might be willing to discuss alternatives. Such as? That would depend on what you're offering in exchange. I'm not offering anything. I'm a law enforcement officer investigating a crime. You're a human being standing at the intersection of the natural and supernatural worlds, Elizabeth said. What you do next will determine not just your own fate, but the fate of everyone who enters these mountains. The weight of responsibility was crushing. How had a routine missing person investigation turned into a decision that could affect hundreds of lives? If I agree to negotiate with these entities, I said, what guarantee do I have that they won't simply kill me? None, Harold admitted. But you have my word that Elizabeth and I won't harm you during the process. The word of confessed serial killers. The word of people who've dedicated their lives to protecting humanity from forces it doesn't understand. I made a decision that went against every instinct I had. Take me back to the clearing. We hiked back through the dark forest, following Harold's flashlight. The woods felt different at night, more alive, more aware. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every sound suggested movement just beyond the range of vision. When we reached the stone circle, the temperature immediately dropped again. Frost began forming on the grass, and that familiar shimmer appeared in the air above the circle. They're waiting, Elizabeth whispered. For what? For you to enter the circle and communicate with them directly. I stared at the ring of stones. Everything rational in my mind said this was suicide. But everything else, the evidence I'd seen, the conversation with Amanda's spirit, the impossible things I'd witnessed, suggested that rational thinking was no longer sufficient. What do I need to do? Simply step inside the circle and speak. They'll hear you. And then we'll see what they have to say. I took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the stone circle. At the edge, I paused and looked back at Harold and Elizabeth. If this kills me, promise me you'll turn yourselves in to the authorities. If this kills you, Harold said, the authorities will never find your body. Comforting. I stepped across the stone boundary. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The temperature plummeted, my vision filled with swirling shadows, and my mind was suddenly flooded with alien thoughts and emotions. The seeker comes at last. The one who questions the balance. The voice spoke directly into my consciousness, bypassing my ears entirely. I'm here about Amanda Hayes, I said aloud. The young one who carried light. She nourishes us still. I want to know if there's another way. A way to maintain your balance without killing innocent people. Innocence is a human concept. We require sustenance. The method of delivery is irrelevant. But it's not irrelevant to me. I've sworn to protect human life. You seek to protect some by sacrificing others. The balance must be maintained. Then help me find a better way. The presence in my mind intensified, and suddenly I could see the forest from the entity's perspective. I saw the network of life force that flowed through every living thing, plants, animals, humans. I saw how the entities fed on this energy, how they required regular sustenance to maintain their containment. But I also saw something else, a weakness, a dependency that could potentially be exploited. You see truly, the voice said, we are bound to this place by ancient agreements, fed by willing servants, contained by sacred barriers. What happens if the servants stop feeding you? We grow weak. Eventually we fade. But first we grow desperate, hungry, willing to break ancient boundaries to survive. And if someone else took over the feeding? Someone who could find willing volunteers instead of innocent victims? Explain. People who are dying anyway. Terminal patients who might choose to donate their life force for a greater purpose. Or criminals condemned to death who could serve their sentences this way. The shadows swirled more rapidly, and I sensed discussion among multiple entities. Interesting, but complex. Such arrangements would require cooperation from human institutions. legal frameworks, official acknowledgement of our existence, which would expose you to scientific study, potential exploitation. Yes, the current arrangement ensures our privacy while meeting our needs. But it also makes you dependent on Harold and Elizabeth. What happens when they die? When they're too old to continue? They train replacements. The cycle continues. What if I offered to be that replacement but with modifications to the system? Improvements that ensure a more reliable, sustainable source of offerings? The temperature dropped even further, and I could feel the entity's intense interest. Elaborate. I work for the federal government. I have access to databases, communication networks, resources that Harold and Elizabeth lack. I could potentially identify volunteers, people who are dying anyway and might choose to contribute their life force to something meaningful. You would formalize the feeding process. I would make it more ethical and more sustainable. And in exchange, you guarantee that no more innocent hikers disappear. The random killings stop. This would require significant changes to ancient patterns. Ancient patterns that are unsustainable in the modern world. Too many people are paying attention to missing hiker statistics. Too many families are asking questions. Eventually, your current system will be exposed. The entities fell silent, and I could feel them conferring among themselves in ways that transcended human understanding. Finally, the voice returned. Your proposal has merit, but it would require a demonstration of commitment. What kind of demonstration? You must provide the first voluntary offering. Prove that your system can work. I'm not going to murder someone to prove a point. Not murder, recruitment. Find someone who would willingly trade their remaining life force for the knowledge that their death serves a greater purpose. That's impossible, is it? Are there no humans facing terminal illnesses who might choose the manner and meaning of their death? No condemned criminals who might prefer spiritual transcendence to legal execution? The entity had a point. There were people in those exact situations, people who might indeed choose this path if they understood the stakes. And if I can find such a person, then we would be willing to modify our arrangement, to accept your terms for a trial period. How long? 1 cycle, 1 full year. If your system proves viable, we would consider making it permanent. And if it doesn't work, then we return to the current arrangement, with you as the new caretaker. I stood in the freezing circle, contemplating the most surreal negotiation of my life. I was discussing sustainable serial killing with supernatural entities that fed on human life force. But if it worked, it could save innocent lives while still maintaining whatever cosmic balance these things represented. I need time to consider this, I said. Time is limited. The current caretakers must relocate soon to avoid human detection. How much time? 7 days. If you have not provided a volunteer by then, we must feed through traditional methods. And Harold and Elizabeth will remain available to assist during the transition period. Where? The entities projected an image into my mind. A remote cabin about 50 miles north, near the Tennessee border. Find us there when you have made your decision. The presence in my mind began to fade, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. It's done, I said, stepping out of the stone circle. Harold and Elizabeth approached cautiously. What did they say? Harold asked. They're willing to negotiate, but I need 7 days to find a volunteer, someone who would willingly sacrifice their life force for the greater good. That's impossible, Elizabeth said. Maybe, maybe not. And if you can't find anyone, then I become the new caretaker under the existing system. You'd do that? Give up your life, your family, to maintain the balance? I thought about my wife Maria, my 2 daughters, the life I'd built over 15 years of marriage. I'd do whatever it takes to protect innocent people, even if it means sacrificing other innocent people, even if it means finding people who are already dying and giving their deaths meaning. Harold nodded slowly. That's actually brilliant. Why didn't we think of it? Because you've been isolated here for 25 years. You haven't kept up with changes in medical technology. legal systems, social attitudes. There are people out there who might genuinely volunteer for this. Terminal cancer patients, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. People with months or weeks to live. Condemned criminals facing execution. Elderly people in pain who are ready to die anyway. Military veterans with PTSD who see themselves as burdens. We were all quiet for a moment, contemplating the implications. It could work, Harold said finally, if you can establish the legal and logistical framework. There's one more thing, I said. If this works, Amanda's death will have contributed to saving hundreds of future victims. Her sacrifice will have meaning. Do you really believe that? I have to believe it. Otherwise, everything that's happened here is just pointless tragedy. We hiked back to Harold and Elizabeth's cabin in contemplative silence. The woods felt different now, less threatening, more like a natural forest than a supernatural hunting ground. What will you tell your superiors? Elizabeth asked as we reached the cabin. I'll tell them I followed up on a lead that didn't pan out. Amanda Hayes remains a missing person, presumed dead. And your wife? I'll tell her I'm working on a complex case that might require some travel over the next few weeks. You're really going to try this? I'm going to try to find a better way. Whether it works or not remains to be seen. Harold handed me a piece of paper with directions to the cabin where they'd be staying. Contact us when you've made progress, he said, or when you've run out of time. I tucked the paper into my jacket pocket and started the long hike back to my truck. The forest was completely dark now, but my headlamp provided enough light to follow the trail. As I walked, I thought about the impossible conversation I'd just had with supernatural entities that might or might not exist. By the time I reached my truck, I'd made a decision. I was going to find a volunteer. 7 days later, Dr. Margaret Chen was 68 years old, had terminal pancreatic cancer, and 6 weeks to live. She was also one of the most remarkable people I'd ever met. So let me understand this correctly, she said, sitting in the coffee shop near Duke University Medical Center. You're telling me that there are supernatural entities in the North Carolina mountains that feed on human life force, and you want me to volunteer to be their next meal? I know how it sounds. It sounds insane, which is why I'm inclined to believe it. Dr. Chen had spent 40 years as a research scientist, studying phenomena that most people dismissed as impossible. When I'd approached her through a colleague who specialized in near-death experiences, she'd listened to my story with the open curiosity of someone accustomed to challenging the boundaries of accepted reality. You said these entities serve a containment function? According to Harold and Elizabeth, they keep more dangerous forces confined to remote areas of the forest. And your own investigation supports this claim? I saw things that I can't explain through conventional means, spoke with the spirit of a murder victim, witnessed manifestations that defied physical laws. But you're still not completely convinced. I'm convinced enough to take action. If I'm wrong, the worst-case scenario is that I help apprehend 2 serial killers. And if you're right, then your willing sacrifice could save hundreds of innocent lives while contributing to our understanding of forces that exist beyond current scientific paradigms. Dr. Chen sipped her coffee thoughtfully. The chemotherapy had left her gaunt and weak, but her eyes remained sharp and engaged. I've been thinking about death a lot lately, she said. About meaning, purpose, legacy. I've published over 200 research papers, mentored dozens of graduate students, contributed to human knowledge in ways that will outlive my physical existence. But I've always wondered if there was something more, some final contribution I could make that would transcend academic achievement. This would certainly qualify. Tell me about the girl who died, Amanda Hayes. 23 years old, environmental science student, passionate about conservation and protecting natural spaces. She was investigating the disappearances? According to Harold and Elizabeth, yes. She suspected that something unusual was happening in that area of the forest. And now her consciousness continues to exist as part of these entities? That's what they claim. I spoke with what appeared to be her spirit. What did she say? That her death could serve a greater purpose if it led to a better system for managing the situation. Dr. Chen finished her coffee and stared out the window at the campus where she'd spent most of her career. "I have a proposal," she said finally. "I'm listening. I'll volunteer, but with conditions. Such as? First, I want to meet these entities myself, to verify their existence and understand their nature. That could be dangerous. I'm dying anyway. At least this way, my death might contribute to something scientifically significant. What other conditions? I want to document the process, record my experiences, my observations, my final thoughts. If I'm going to die for science, I want it to advance human understanding. The entities might not allow that. Then we negotiate. If they want my willing cooperation, they have to accept my terms." I stared at this remarkable woman who was proposing to sacrifice her life for strangers she'd never meet. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure that I'm going to die within the next few weeks no matter what I do. I'm sure that I'd rather my death have meaning than be a meaningless surrender to cellular malfunction. And I'm sure that if there's even a chance this could save innocent lives, I have a moral obligation to try." "What about your family?" "My husband died 3 years ago. My children live overseas and visit twice a year out of duty rather than love. My closest relationships are with my research colleagues, who understand that advancing human knowledge sometimes requires personal sacrifice. This isn't exactly peer-reviewed research. The most important discoveries rarely are at first." 2 days later, I drove Dr. Chen into the mountains of North Carolina, following the directions Harold had given me. She'd spent the intervening time setting her affairs in order and preparing research protocols for documenting her experience. "Are you nervous?" I asked as we wound up the mountain roads. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also more excited than I've been in years. If we're right about this, we're about to make contact with forms of consciousness that exist beyond current human understanding. And if we're wrong, then I'll die a few weeks earlier than expected. Given the level of pain I'm already experiencing, that might actually be a mercy." We found the cabin exactly where the entities had indicated. Harold and Elizabeth were waiting for us, along with something else, a presence that made the hair on my arms stand up despite the warm afternoon air. "They're here," Elizabeth said simply. "They've been waiting." Dr. Chen climbed slowly out of my truck, her movement careful and deliberate due to the cancer's progression. "Dr. Margaret Chen," she said, extending her hand to Harold. "I understand you have a rather unusual scientific opportunity for me." Harold smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "Doctor, you have no idea how refreshing it is to meet someone who approaches this situation with intellectual curiosity rather than fear." "Oh, I'm afraid. But fear has never stopped me from pursuing knowledge." Elizabeth led us to a clearing behind the cabin, where another stone circle had been constructed. This one was smaller than the original, more intimate. "They prefer to meet new candidates here," she explained. "The energy is gentler." "Candidates?" Dr. Chen asked. "People who might be suitable for voluntary offering," Harold said. "Not everyone is compatible with their feeding requirements." "What determines compatibility?" "Consciousness complexity, emotional depth, strength of life force. They're quite selective." Dr. Chen approached the stone circle with the methodical observation style of a scientist examining a new phenomenon. "Fascinating. The grass inside the circle is definitely dying, but not from any obvious cause. Soil temperature appears to be significantly lower than the surrounding area." She pulled out a digital thermometer and took readings at various points around the circle. Temperature differential of 15 degrees between inside and outside the circle. No geological features that would explain this variation. "Doctor," I said, "you might want to step back. When they manifest, the effects can be quite intense." "Nonsense. I need to collect baseline data before the phenomenon begins." As if summoned by her words, the air inside the circle began to shimmer. The temperature dropped rapidly and frost formed on the grass despite the warm afternoon weather. Dr. Chen immediately began documenting everything, speaking into a digital recorder while taking photographs with a high-resolution camera. Initial manifestation beginning at 2:47 p.m. Visible distortion of air inside stone circle, accompanied by rapid temperature decrease. frost formation occurring despite ambient temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The shadow figures began to coalesce, tall and elongated, made of darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than simply blocking it. Remarkable, Dr. Chen breathed. They appear to be composed of some form of organized energy that interacts with electromagnetic radiation in ways that shouldn't be possible. The largest figure turned toward her, and I felt the familiar pressure in my skull that indicated telepathic communication. The seeker of knowledge comes willingly. Dr. Chen, I said, they're communicating telepathically. You should be receiving. I hear them, she said, her voice filled with wonder, not through my ears but directly into my consciousness. The implications for understanding the nature of consciousness itself are staggering. You wish to join us willingly? I wish to understand what you are, what you represent, and how my death could serve both scientific advancement and the protection of innocent lives. Understanding requires experience. Experience requires surrender. I'm prepared for that. But I have conditions. The shadow figures pulsed with what might have been amusement. The dying one negotiates with the eternal ones. The dying scientist negotiates with previously unknown forms of consciousness, Dr. Chen corrected. I'm willing to sacrifice my remaining weeks of life, but I want something in return. State your terms. First, I want to document this process for the advancement of human knowledge. My sacrifice should contribute to scientific understanding. Acceptable. Second, I want confirmation that my death will genuinely save other lives. I need to understand the mechanism by which your feeding prevents harm to the broader population. We will show you the truth of containment. Third, I want to verify that the consciousness of previous offerings, particularly Amanda Hayes, continues to exist in some form within your collective. She may speak for herself. The shadow swirled, and Amanda's form appeared at the edge of the circle, clearer and more solid than I'd seen her before. Dr. Chen, Amanda said, thank you for considering this. I know how it sounds, how impossible it seems. From a scientific perspective, the impossibility is what makes it fascinating, Dr. Chen replied. Are you truly conscious? Do you retain individual identity within their collective? I'm changed. My consciousness exists as part of something larger, but my memories, my personality, my essential self remain intact. It's like being a single instrument in a vast orchestra, distinct but contributing to something greater. And the other offerings? They're here too. Dozens of people spanning centuries. Each death has contributed to maintaining the balance, keeping ancient forces confined to areas where they can't harm the innocent. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. And my death would serve the same function? Your death would do more than that. It would help establish a new system, a more ethical approach that could save hundreds of future victims. Then I accept. The shadow figures grew more solid, and I felt their collective attention focusing on Dr. Chen with intensity that made the air vibrate. The offering is accepted. The transition will begin at sunset. How long do I have? Dr. Chen asked. 4 hours to complete your documentation. She immediately began setting up additional recording equipment. Video cameras, audio recorders, even an electromagnetic field detector she'd brought from her laboratory. Sam, she said, I need you to take this equipment back to Duke after the process is complete. Give it to Dr. James Morrison in the physics department. Tell him it's my final research project. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Over the next 4 hours, Dr. Chen conducted the most extraordinary scientific investigation in human history. She interviewed Amanda's spirit about the nature of consciousness after death. She documented the entity's manifestations with scientific precision. She recorded detailed observations about the interaction between supernatural forces and physical reality. Most importantly, she confirmed that the entities were indeed serving a containment function, keeping much more dangerous forces confined to remote areas of the forest. The implications are staggering, she said as the sun began to set. These entities aren't just predators, they're guardians, ancient intelligences that have been protecting humanity from forces we don't even know exist. Does that make this easier? I asked. It makes it meaningful. My death will contribute to the protection of countless innocent people. How many scientists get the opportunity to make that kind of final contribution? As the sun touched the horizon, the entities began to manifest more fully. The temperature plummeted and the air inside the circle became thick with supernatural energy. "It's time," Amanda said softly. Dr. Chen gathered her recording equipment and stepped toward the stone circle. "Dr. Chen," I said, "I want you to know. You're the bravest person I've ever met." "I'm a scientist," she replied. "This is what we do. We explore the unknown, even when it costs us everything." She entered the circle without hesitation. What happened next defied description. The shadow figures surrounded her, and she began to glow with an inner light that grew brighter and brighter. Her voice continued to narrate her experience for the recordings even as her physical form became translucent. Consciousness expanding, individual identity merging with collective awareness, indescribable sense of connection to fundamental forces of reality. The light reached a blinding intensity, then gradually faded. When it was gone, Dr. Chen's body had vanished, but her voice continued to speak from the shadows. "I'm here, Sam. I'm still here, but more. So much more. The offering is complete. The balance is maintained. The new system is approved." "For how long?" I asked. "1 cycle, 1 year. If you can provide willing volunteers on a regular basis, the random killings will cease permanently. And if I can't, then the old ways will return. But we are optimistic about your chances." Harold approached me as the entities faded back into whatever dimension they normally inhabited. "You did it," he said. "You actually found a volunteer." "Dr. Chen found me," I corrected. "She sought this out." Either way, the system has changed. For the first time in 25 years, we have hope for a better approach. What happens now? Now you go back to your life and your job. When we need the next volunteer, we'll contact you. How often? Every few months, probably. The entity's needs vary based on their energy levels and external factors. I looked back at the stone circle where Dr. Chen had made her final sacrifice. She really did it for science, didn't she? And for the protection of innocent people, Elizabeth added. She died knowing that her sacrifice would save hundreds of lives. 3 weeks later, I submitted my final report on the Amanda Hayes disappearance. Death by misadventure in a wilderness area, body never recovered, case closed. I returned to my normal duties as a park ranger, but with a new sense of purpose. I'd made contact with a world beyond human understanding, and I'd helped establish a system that could protect innocent people from forces they'd never know existed. Dr. Chen's research equipment was delivered to Duke University, where Dr. Morrison spent months analyzing her final recordings. He published a paper titled "Anomalous Electromagnetic Phenomena in Remote Forest Environments" that didn't mention supernatural entities but documented scientifically inexplicable energy readings. 6 months later, I received a call from Harold. "We need another volunteer," he said simply. "I'll start looking." "There's something else. Dr. Chen wants to speak with you." "That's possible?" "She's learned to communicate through the sacred circle. She has a message for you." 2 days later, I stood once again in the mountain clearing, facing the shadow figures that had become an impossible part of my reality. "Samuel." Dr. Chen's voice spoke directly into my mind. "I wanted you to know. The consciousness expansion is extraordinary. I understand so much more now about the nature of reality, about the forces that shape our universe." "Are you happy?" I asked. Happy is too simple a word. I'm complete, fulfilled. My death has meaning beyond anything I could have achieved in life. Do you have any regrets? Only that it took terminal cancer for me to find the courage to make this choice. There are so many people out there who are ready to die, Sam. People in pain, people without hope, people who would volunteer for this if they understood what it means. I'm working on finding them, I know. And I want you to know that Amanda and I and all the others who have made this sacrifice, we're here to help. We understand both human nature and the entity's requirements. We can guide you to the right people. Over the following months, that's exactly what happened. Through dreams, through moments of unusual clarity, through coincidences that weren't really coincidences, I was guided to people who were ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for a greater purpose. A retired soldier with PTSD who saw his death as a final act of service to his country. An elderly woman with Alzheimer's who wanted her death to have meaning before her mind completely deteriorated. A man on death row who chose spiritual transcendence over legal execution. Each volunteer was carefully screened by the entities, interviewed by the spirits of previous offerings, and given full disclosure about what the process entailed. No one was coerced. No one was deceived. Every death was genuinely voluntary, and the random disappearances stopped. For the first time in decades, hikers could explore the deep forests of North Carolina without fear of supernatural predators. The balance was maintained through willing sacrifice rather than murder. Amanda Hayes' death had meaning. Dr. Chen's sacrifice had revolutionized an ancient system, and I had become the guardian of a secret that protected thousands of innocent people. My name is Samuel Rodriguez, and I never found Amanda Hayes' body. But I found something more important. I found a way to turn senseless tragedy into meaningful protection for the innocent. The entities still hunger. They always will. But now their hunger is satisfied by people who choose to feed them. People who understand that their deaths serve a greater purpose. It's not a perfect system. It's not an easy system. But it's a better system than what came before. And sometimes that's all we can hope for. Sometimes the best we can do is find meaning in the darkness. If this story gave you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Sam's situation? Comment below. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Amanda Hayes. I read every single one.